Hello, and welcome to another episode of Connection Alchemy. My name's Emma Buggy, and I am here because I'm passionate about turning our relationship garbage into relationship gold. Today, I have a treat for you in store because we are going to be listening in on an interview that I had with a new dear friend of mine called Haneen Khan. She is a sex and intimacy coach who runs a business called Sexy and Silly. And if I were to describe it with my understanding, Haneen really explores the intersection between great communication, sexiness, having fun in the bedroom, exploring pleasure, and getting clear on what feels good for you so that you have more clarity, sensuality, presence, and joy in your relationships. I'm sure that Haneen would add even more to that, but in order to explore this with me, listen to the rest of the episode, because what we're going to be talking about today is the power of expressing your needs in the bedroom, asking for what you want, getting clear on what you want, and also the beauty in being able to express the vulnerabilities around doing that, the power in the vulnerability of asking yourself, what do I want? What feels good for me? What brings me pleasure? I hope that you enjoy the episode and listen to the end. Let us know what you think and get in touch if you have any questions around sex, intimacy, relationships, how to argue better, anything else that comes to mind that you would love to hear myself or Haneen talking about in future episodes, because we're definitely going to be talking again. Professional.
Yeah. If I, even when I do this, there's a part of it that's perfecting silliness. Like, perfectly silly.
Yes. In exactly the way that people will laugh.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm here with you, Haneen, yet again having an exciting conversation around sex and dating. And Haneen is a relationship coach who we've just recently kindled a connection that seems so effortless and flowing and fun between us, right?
100%. It's crazy how we just like launch straight away into so much depth. It's beautiful to see.
I know, I feel like, yeah, Haneen, my long-time friend, I've known you for years.
Right. I hope it gets captured on this episode too, because it's just been so effortless, and now we've got the record button. So I'd be curious to see if we can keep this sense of effortlessness and for me, form. I'd love to.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that, and not to go into the performance mode of we've got a record button and people are listening, and so now we need to be different than how we were before we pressed record.
Totally. No, because I think my whole shtick is I have to be valuable. I have to be interesting at all times. And so, yeah, that's not very possible. I think I really do need to just be human and flawed. So, yeah, that during this episode.
I appreciate you bringing that in as well, because I also notice myself as well. Like I even take a breath before I start recording, and there's a part of me that's like, oh, I want to just start with self-acceptance. And I can feel the other part that's like, but it needs to sound clear and good and interesting and valuable. Otherwise, people are going to press stop. And even now, I'm like, I'm worried if I'm talking too much about this thing and we're not talking about the topic. And
God. Oh my God, so much resonance with this. Have faith.
All right. Oh, but yes, I do want to actually bring us back round to the topic, which is we don't even know what the topic is, but we do know that we want to talk about sex, intimacy, dating, relationships. And I would like to dive a little bit more into your world, Haneen. Ever since I saw you at Butterfield at a festival and went to one of your workshops, which I found so fun. It was around flirting, and I was like, one of the best flirting workshops I've ever been to. I came out of it like, friends, you've got to go to Haneen. And then I got your sex and intimacy cards, which I've been using constantly with my friends. I just, it's like I carry it around in my bag, like, let's get the cards out and answer the questions because they're so inviting that sense of self-awareness and closeness. And so, yeah, I'm curious to, since all of that has been bubbling in me and we've got in contact, I'm curious to know a bit more, a dive deeper into your journey with how you even came into sex coaching and what it means to you. And wherever that takes us, we shall see.
Yeah, I have this little observation just in this moment, where I
Yeah.
feel almost like we're on a date and I'm being flirted with because there's something so like when someone takes such an avid interest in you and there's like all this
Mm.
attention and care and like, tell me about your world and I want to know about you and your like desire, like how where did this come from, this passion of yours? And yeah, there's a part of me that like I just felt like this buzziness in my cheeks and lightness. And I felt, yeah, it felt really lovely to witness. I'm excited.
And and it touches upon something we spoke about before, doesn't it? It's like it's so nice to be shown interest in you. Like it's so delicious to have someone show their interest and curiosity. It's like, oh, then something, some part that wants to share is opened up. And it's like, yeah, I do want to share who I am, especially if you want to hear about me.
Yeah, there's no greater gift than of someone than to like to be delighted in, to be
Yes.
celebrated, to be yeah, take an interest in. You said it really well. It's beauty. And I think there's a real growth edge for me, maybe for us, in terms of like this idea of taking interest in myself, maybe in in like voluntarily without needing someone to express that first in me.
Yeah. Huge one for me. It feels like a real ongoing difficulty, that sense of like, can I be interesting just for me, regardless of whether the other person is interested or not? And also, when in connection with new people, can I just bring what I'm interested in rather than becoming the follower and the curious one, which is like my comfortable zone, where I know that I feel safe. And we were talking about how we shared that. I mean, right?
Isn't this a direct parallel to sex? Because I feel like this comes up in almost all of my clients. It's like this feeling
Hmm.
of, oh, can I just like it's so much easier for me to take the cues of what the other person is giving me in sex and what they like and how they breathe. Oh, they're smiling here, they're moaning here. Let me keep doing this thing to help them feel good because then we'll have had
Mm.
great sex. And then they lose connection to themselves and feeling touch and pleasure for themselves, right? It's like the only pleasure that they're experiencing is that of the pleasure of the other person. It's like giving you
Yeah.
pleasure gives me pleasure. It's no longer like, oh, I'm here because it feels yummy to my body. And I think
Mm.
love helping people reclaim that again. Like, oh yes, touch feels so good. Oh, this is what I like. This is which is why the sex and intimacy deck that the conversation card deck had such an onus on self-awareness questions of like, what do you like? What do you want in this situation, in this context, this after
Mm.
this you know, kink. I think there's such a I think we're not we take such an interest in self-awareness outside of sex, like who we are, but we don't build enough awareness of what we want in sex.
Mm.
I think just because the emphasis on pleasing and following and performing is so high in sex, especially.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think connections to ourselves is so important.
Yeah. So do you find that very often people are coming with a sense of like, because the onus is so much on, I want to be enough, I want to be the best, I want to please you, they're forgetting themselves and like we said about in conversation, they're forgetting who they are, what they want. And then that the kind of norm is that people are not as clear on what's actually good for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel it's easier to when we don't really have a solid idea of what we like in sex because let's face it, a lot of us don't um,
Mhm.
it becomes easier to default to what's already happening. I think especially because there's this pressure in sex to be effortless, to be
Yeah, Like seamless.
Seamless, telepathic, yeah.
Yeah.
And so like it's weird to like stop and pause and talk about what you want, and like
Yeah.
maybe ask for something and then that person might go, actually I don't really feel like doing it. Like that would feel, that could feel quite horrifying for people.
Yeah.
You know, if I just ask for something very unvulnerable, that's the word, like, could you get me a cup of tea? That's not so vulnerable. But if it's like, could you like massage my shoulders? And that person goes, no, I don't feel comfortable. Or worse than says, yeah, yes, but they don't want to.
Want to.
And then you're like, oh, wow. And people just don't want to experience that risk. So it's so much easier not to say anything. And I feel like, I think it comes down to not just knowing what it is that we want. This feels like so much deeper. It feels like am I allowed to get what I want? Am I worthy of that? Is it okay for me to want?
Yes. Yeah. Is it okay for me to even have a desire that's different from what you desire? And that's my own, and that I can ask for it.
100%.
Am I worthy of asking?
Yeah. Yeah. Which is such a hard, it's like, am I worthy of asking? Yeah. It almost somehow that speaks to my cognitive brain. Like my primitive brain is like, oh, it just feels needy, is kind of
Too
where
much.
it feels too much. It feels somehow like I'm being coercive, or that I'm and so it's easier to sneak my needs in through some other channel. It's like I'll touch that person pretending it's for them, but actually it's for me, or something
It's
like
for
that.
you.
Kind of incidental pleasure. And I think that feels so sad to me. It feels sad that there's this like label of selfishness attached to getting our needs met, to having the spotlight on us, to receiving, to getting our needs met. Like, why is that seen as like indulgent or selfish? Just that, I don't know, that gets me angry. It gets me angry. And I guess story where I was always seen as the selfish child, and it's still with me today. And I think I've had to do so much work to help like myself celebrate my neediness.
If you're new to this podcast, or even if you have been listening for a while, what really helps us to get these episodes out to more people is if you follow the podcast and rate it with 5 stars. This means the algorithm somehow makes sure that other people out there find out about the work that we do. That just makes offering these podcasts a lot more enjoyable for me, because I want more people to have access to the work. I want to hear from more voices about what would be interesting for you to hear about. And the more people we get to, the more questions we get, and the more interesting people we get to talk to on the podcast. So please do share, like, and follow. On top of that, if you're enjoying the content that you come across in these episodes, then I'd love to invite you over to my website, www.empathart.com. That address will be changing soon, but all information will be sent directly back to the new page. There you can find out about upcoming workshops that I'll be holding around compassion, authenticity, and intimacy in relationships, not just romantic. I really believe in the power of being able to slow down and find out what's really important for you in your relationships, and where you're getting stuck in communicating your needs or hearing the other person, so that actually conflict can become your best friend. It can become a way that you get closer to the people that you love. I'm very passionate about supporting people to uncover where they're getting stuck and get that transformative experience of understanding the beautiful needs that are motivating us behind every expression of judgment, blame, every moment where we get frozen, every moment where we push back. There's always something magical that's trying to be expressed in a tragic language. So if you want to learn how to do that, if you want to feel more confident in your relationships, have a look. There's a workshop called Connecting Mindfully that's happening this weekend on the 16th and 17th of March, where I'll be joining Andy Hicks, my dear friend and mindfulness coach. And there's another one happening from the 16th of April until the 22nd of May in London, and we'll be exploring the foundational skills that you need in order to learn non-violent communication or compassionate and authentic relating. And now we will get back to the episode. Yeah. I love that you brought that in, because I was about to ask you that actually. Like, do you find in yourself, when you said it makes you angry, I was wondering, do you find in yourself that there's a part of you that's learned in some way that your needs are too much or they don't matter and that you shouldn't ask for them? And like, how has that shown up for you personally in your sex journey before you came into relationship coaching, where you were discovering, like when you were in the discomfort, if you feel open to sharing that, because I know that could be a vulnerable question.
No, I love it. I love this question. And I wonder if it'll be resonant for people, because I think I have had a bit of an unusual journey with this. I I've always found sex to be quite a separate category of my life to like the rest of my non-sex life, you could say. In that it's rare that I've experienced selfishness in sex. And then maybe that's why I moved into sex coaching. So your question was, wait, have I experienced this too much not enoughness?
Like, were there times in your past where you experienced the sense that your needs are selfish and that you asking for what you need is too much? And then, so that's the first part. And the second part is like, and did that then show up in some way in your sexual exploration? Not as like, I am selfish, but asking for what I need might be too much before you became a sex coach, like in that moment of noticing discomfort in sex.
Oh yeah, immediately. Okay, I'll talk about that's my second part. So my first part of that question is, there's definitely a feeling of I'm too, like almost a default state of I'm a burden in some way.
I'm a burden.
I'm a burden. And so it's just when I'm in connection with someone, the need for me to be as easygoing as possible is very strong. It's like, I want to be flexible with where we're eating and how we're connecting and our topic of conversation. That's kind of where I've started my journey. I guess it's a form of people pleasing. It is.
Yeah.
To counteract the feeling of, okay, I don't ever want to feel like a burden. So how do I not feel that? I'll just be as easygoing as possible.
Like molding yourself towards them in order to like minimize the amount of friction that can happen. I'll just become more like what you like.
Yes, I will. And I was really good at that. It's eerie. And I think that's a reflection often of how threatening if a parent is very threatening and scary, a child learns to be as accommodating and as people pleasing as possible. And so it really reflected in the way I've, started my journey with like relating, and struggle to be authentic, because that surely threatened connection. Surely me bringing in no, I don't want that. You're talking too much. I think that was the big one for me was, I think I got drained by connection quickly because I wasn't speaking into my needs. And I would say the needs that I often felt were too much were around big emotions. So if I felt like insecure or angry, and in fact, if I could even notice that, or where I felt hurt by somebody, immediately there was I can't bring this in. That's too much. I can't bring those feelings in. So I'm going to, in some way, find another way for them to. I became really good at actually asking in ways that weren't very clear.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was I started to make, and this is where it starts to connect with sex and it gets really interesting, was I realized that I felt more worthy around being playful and sexual with people. I was like, surely I didn't think I could be seen as needy when it came to sex.
Yeah.
So I started to make friends like this. It was like I just started having sex with all these guys around my life. And I was like, oh, this is fun and playful. And I felt very worthy of that. I was like, oh, this is a place I'm comfortable with. So I started having all these friends with benefits, like one after the other,
Mm-hmm.
5 years in a row. It's just like, this was my life. And then the part where it felt very difficult for me to lean into was, oh, I want a relationship with this person. And that was like, no, 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 I can't. That's too much. Because then they're going to experience like the fullness of Haneen and like all of my ugly, messy parts. And
Yeah.
fun, playful, sexy Haneen is what people really want. Oh, that's interesting. The giggle at the end as well, I noticed.
Yeah.
Some discomfort there. But yeah, I think it feels maybe also because I've talked about it and really integrated that part of me and feel at peace with my choices at that time. Um, so yeah, now in terms of sex, he doesn't thankfully show up in sex, perhaps because of that journey. And I think the more interesting
Yeah.
for me has been, where is it showing up outside of sex, and how can I make it's almost like I'm using the felt sense of what it's like to be sexually worthy and being like, where can I apply that in the rest of my life, whereas I'm used
Ah, wow.
to do the opposite.
Wow. So it's like a the natural worthiness that you discovered through playful sexuality is a reference point for you to say, I want to feel like that when I'm not having sex, when I'm just being Haneen in a relationship with someone, bringing all the parts of who I am, including the awkward bits and the bits that feel uncomfortable and that I'm afraid they might not like. Is that it?
Yeah, that touches me just hearing you say that. That feels so accurate. And even in my business life, like so on,
Yes.
that's like, it's so funny to hear other entrepreneurs. They ask me about, they get stuck on dating and sex. And I'm like, oh, well, if you feel worthy and you're like, I feel worthy there. So it's really easy for me to advise them from this place. And then when I'm
Yeah.
making entrepreneurial decisions, there's like a certain stuckness in me
Yeah.
because yeah, I haven't completely fulfilled my potential there. I don't feel completely worthy in my business identity yet.
Yeah. I'm just noticing how touched I am by this phenomena. I don't know if that's the right word, of how the same pattern, vulnerable pattern that um, is like showing up in all different areas of life, and the beauty of how the confidence in sexuality and sex and the playfulness that you have there that shows you self-worth has been a way to support you to go, this is how I really want to feel in my power, in my self-loving, free-spirited, all of who I am. And I notice I just feel really touched by, yeah, I don't know, somehow how that's somehow bringing you into alignment in other places where there isn't that where there's still discomfort. And also it's touching something very real in me in a different way. I just feel like a lot of resonance around um what is it? Yeah, I guess like we spoke about before, the part of me that maybe doesn't feel worthy and doesn't fully show up in my business and in my and also in relationships. You're like, oh, when you get the full Emma, are you really gonna she's she might be a relationship coach and she can teach communication, but she got lots of insecurities. I'm telling you. Like,
The best of us do. Otherwise, I don't trust people who don't have any insecurities. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I notice I enjoy hearing you say that. I don't trust people who don't have any insecurities because it's true. I actually don't feel safe when I don't hear that there are insecurities. It's something about like it's a part of just being a human being in this fleshy body that we have insecurities. So,
absolutely. Yeah, there's the vulnerability makes me want to reach out and connect, and actually there's something even deeper than that. It's when I hear someone articulate their insecurities, it helps me feel reassured that they're aware of themselves and in connection with themselves. So I don't have to do any guesswork. I
yes,
They can take responsibility for themselves, and I'm
yes,
rest in that and don't
yeah.
and that feels very safe, and that makes me want to connect with that person. Um,
Mm,
which is maybe ironic. Like we think, oh, if I don't show any insecurity, I'm more attractive. And actually, for me, it's the opposite. And
yeah,
the way they articulate the insecurity, that is the determinator of whether I can connect with them. And like if it's shared in a way, if it's shared like in a sort of passive way, that's different.
yeah.
About people who can really share insecurity from a place of like, oh, I'm
It's
going
happening now.
that's happening now. Yeah, exactly. And it's real, and hey, let me show it to you. Let me express it to you. And
Little this
sexy.
vulnerable jelly package of emotion that needs tenderness. Like, here you go, it's here.
I don't know if this will be a video, but Emma's like shaking her hands in this really cute wobbly way. It's
Like a little wobbly jelly.
so cute.
Oh, I just noticed what that that touched something. There was just an image that came that I want to see if I can capture, but it might be a moment where I've just lost something, and that's okay if that happens. Um, oh yeah, and it also just touched upon this thing for me around and maybe it feels more vulnerable actually to admit this in myself, but it's like when I hear that someone else is able to name their insecurities, I also feel a relief around there's space for my humanity too.
Like the permission.
Permission for us to be messy humans together with awareness and care for the impact that our humanity has on ourselves and each other. But like if you express your vulnerabilities, I'm like, oh, okay, I have them too. It's okay. We can share it together. Whereas if it's like it's just me sharing the vulnerabilities and there's nothing, I'm like, I want to know that you're also human. And me knowing that you're also human gives me more permission to be with my humanity. So it feels extra, extra, extra vulnerable to be vulnerable on my own, whereas it feels more safe to have vulnerability together and more kind of like less of a hierarchical image in my mind and more of a sense of like just being in the family or being in a relationship.
I love that. And immediately what came up was just a caution to those listening that it's not about trying to chime in. Let's say Emma shares something, and
No.
I also resonate, and my
Yes.
experience has also been so much worse. And like, or it's not about inserting your vulnerabilities in order to connect. That's what we're going for here.
No, because that's another that's kind of like and that's a trap that we can easily get into. I've definitely done that in the past, or I've been on both ends of that. And like yeah, because if the I guess the problem with inserting vulnerabilities in order to connect is that it's not coming from an authentic place and it can become about competition. And then the person who's just shared is not really being given space to just be heard for their vulnerability. And it's about, oh, me too, me too. And then like, there's no space for real connection and authenticity to happen because we get lost in the storytelling rather than the like being present with the vulnerability that's being shared. And then when one that's real comes in me, I also share mine and we're present with that, which is a different thing, I guess.
I really
Is
love.
that what you were pointing to?
Yeah, I love that you've expanded on this. I think, like, I really recognize the pure intention with which people chime in to go, oh, I also resonate. I also really feel the same thing about X. And I think it's a bid for connection of like, hey, I see you. Sometimes it can come from that place.
Yeah.
And I also think that there are so many other alternative responses that I feel could be even more in support of that person's vulnerability. And it's like, which for me, I speak for myself, when I share vulnerability, the greatest gift someone can give me is space to feel my feelings without judging it, without changing it, without fixing it. And just hey, thank you for sharing. That was very tender. Or that feels, it was very touching to witness. Or I wonder how I can support you, or something like that. And then just because I otherwise I'm receiving a message of it's not okay to have
Yeah,
this, and,
yeah,
or that every time I share something, someone else, yeah, I think it becomes a bit of a let me share. I remember I used to make friends. I never thought I could share something positive with people. It was like I had to have something going wrong in my life, and that's how I connected.
yeah. Yes,
Like,
right.
yeah. Oh, my
Yes.
relationship, my partner, he's been such an asshole. He was doing blah blah blah. And then when things were going right, I was like, I didn't have anything to say, and then I didn't feel like an interesting person. Um, there's also that, but maybe that's a slightly different. I think I'm touching on something
I'm
different.
sure people can resonate with that as like it's a phenomena. You go to the school. I mean, I used to work in schools, and you go to the canteen, to the staff room, and it's like gossip is it's a part of the culture of connection. It's like when we're gossiping, we're basically saying, I want to be seen and heard and understood. I want to meet you in a common ground where we understand each other. And if we gossip or complain or whinge or and that doesn't mean that any of those things are wrong. It's just that that's become it's the negativity bias and the wish to be seen and met and understood in connection with people that can draw us towards the I'm only interesting if I have a problem, and therefore I'm only going to share my problems rather than trusting that actually my celebrations, my beauty, my excitement are also really interesting because I find them interesting and maybe you will too. But we haven't socialized ourselves to doing that because the negativity bias. This is my um analysis. I'm not saying it's the truth, but we have that negativity bias as humans to like focus on the negative in order to feel safe. So it's kind of like we're drawn towards that in communication and connection. And also, I remember like Yuval Noah Harari, this historian, talks a lot about like the beginning of language and that language, and storytelling and mythology. They they all started with talking about the dangers of the lions and the bisons that are hiding in the shadows, or like where's the alligator that's going to bite your leg off, and it was all about warnings, and then it became mythological and storytelling, and then we have language as we have it now. So it's kind of it's in our nature to tell the stories of what's going wrong.
So interesting. But then I wonder what we're telling ourselves when we do connect from that place. It's like I'm
Exactly.
only worthy of connecting to when I have things going wrong, and then you attract people on that wavelength who also feel the same way, and you're suddenly surrounded by people who are like, oh, like my life is so bad.
Yes.
That's how we connect. And it really sent chills, like tingles in my body when you said, hey, I'm actually worthy of connecting, and through just my sheer like my pleasures and my joy and my
Yeah.
love of life. And I suddenly felt this like interesting, both a contraction and an expansion, because that's still a growth edge for me to
Yeah.
like celebrate myself and to share. Like I'm so heavily geared towards let me share struggle, let me share that
Mhm.
first, because that's more relatable. I want to be relatable to people. And surely me sharing a celebration is me being narcissistic, or me being, I don't insert, some negative identity. And I think that's what I want to help rewire I think there's something really powerful in being witnessed in our joy, in our achievements, in our celebrations by others. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's the same. Like,
Yeah. And allowing that to sink in and just to sit with the receiving of being witnessed and being with our joy. And like I'm hearing you saying, it's powerful and it's uncomfortable because it's not what you're used to.
mm,
Yeah.
so spot on. Yeah, powerful and uncomfortable. It's
Yeah.
vulnerable. That's actually the definition of
It's vulnerable.
vulnerability.
It
Yeah.
is vulnerable to be witnessed in our joy
Mm.
unapologetically.
Yeah, it's funny that joy can be vulnerable, right?
And I'm, yes, and now I suddenly have this curiosity linking it back to sex and orgasm and coming and or not coming or and the performance and all of that. Like because that can also be such a vulnerable moment to be witnessed in the way that you experience pleasure with another person. And I'm wondering how you,
Well,
if you see that as a common thread with people that you work with.
that's so interesting because I never thought about it. I love that the angle that you came into this with, right? It's like, oh, it can be vulnerable to be in joy and witnessed in joy. And of course, there is that happens in sex. There is this
Yeah,
unfettered self-expression, and that's completely uninhibited. It's like what you know, if you really let yourself go, there is this rawness and wildness about it that's just you can't control it. There's no, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Um,
taming.
yeah, exactly. You can't tame it, you can't um control it. And so do I see that happen the people I work with? I think they don't know that that's what's happening.
Yes,
They certainly wouldn't think that that's what they're going
they
through.
wouldn't label it as that.
Wouldn't label it that way. But I do think there is a maybe there's something here around like when I if I lose myself in this connection, there's something about someone catching. Does that feel right? There's like it's funny at this point because of course sex is the place where I don't have that restriction in me. I don't feel that embodied.
Mm,
I don't I experience the vulnerability of joy outside of sex, but not the vulnerability of joy in sex, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
So you're trying to connect it from an outsider perspective rather than from a personal experience.
exactly.
Yeah.
But where it is, okay, perfect is orgasms. I have struggled with orgasming. I still don't feel like I've completed my orgasm journey, and I'm not sure I've
Mm.
completely, whatever that looks like. But there is something about like can I be completely in yeah, I've just realized this all links to fantasy, which is another topic I really
Mm.
um yeah. Okay. My relationship to pleasure. Pleasure, I grew up I internalizing this belief that pleasure is selfish, right? Pleasure is um some way indulgent and I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to impose my pleasure on others. It's almost like me being in pleasure isn't doesn't reconcile with sex somehow,
Mm.
romantic, wholesome connection. And so the way my mind makes it safe for me to feel pleasure, because that would be too vulnerable, is it starts to create a certain narrative that makes it safe. And the narrative that my mind creates, and this is where my fantasy comes in, and this is how fantasies are created. It's like, how can I make pleasure safe?
Yeah.
It makes the person who's pleasuring me anonymous, so I don't have to feel any fear of impressing them or being enough for them because they're just a stranger, a doctor, somebody that's just using me in
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and I'm also in some way restrained. I don't have control over this situation. So this cannot possibly be selfish. This can't be indulgent. I'm in a situation where, if anything, it's the opposite. And so from that place, I can really surrender because none of my
Yeah.
insecurities and my deep belief of like, oh, this is selfish, oh, I'm a burden, is activated here. In fact, it's the opposite. And so um, I think my journey around unraveling that has been so powerful. And now I'm seeing that I'm maturing from this. I need to almost stop relying on this fantasy to give me pleasure. Like the next stage is okay, I've accepted that. Now I can feel
Hmm.
pleasure because thank you to this fantasy. Now, how do I heal that part in me? How can I feel pleasure from this place of like, oh, I am feeling selfish. Oh, I am like, this is for
Yeah.
me. And that's where I'm growing. And I think that's been a beautiful journey based on a lot of communication with my partner, going really slowly, giving myself the permission to take the time to ask for what I need, to feel confident to share things like slowing down, taking more deep breaths, remembering that it's for me, not being attached to orgasm.
Yeah.
And it takes time. That takes so much time. It's not an overnight thing at all.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So actually, yeah, it does come up for me in sex, just not in the way I kind of expected.
I love seeing you put your hands on your hips. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not for me. It's sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so hearing that it's really that same very deep-rooted vulnerability of I'm too much and I'm selfish that like comes up in the moment where you're really allowing yourself to receive pleasure. It's like, am I able to just receive pleasure simply because I'm worthy of receiving pleasure, not because, you know, of the other person's needs or making it selfless. And so it sounds like you're in this moment of your journey. And I love how you said it's a really slow process and it's ongoing. And like I almost want to pause that for a second for those who are listening before I'm not attached to finishing what I just said. Because I noticed like what that brings up in me is like my heart is now feeling like tension and also in my belly because it touches something vulnerable in me that's like, oh, if I am going to, I'm moving towards the sexual side of supporting couples in intimacy, from being a communications and relationship coach, I'm moving towards that slowly, and it touches a vulnerable part in me that's like, well, what if I'm not already complete in my journey, then who am I to support others?
Right.
And when I hear you saying that, I'm like, I really feel the kind of relief in my system that I imagine might be there for people who are listening, that there is no completion. And I feel like crying when I say that. There's no completion. There's no completion in any of our journeys of self-discovery and going inwards. It's not about reaching a final, there is no such thing as perfection. There is no place to get to. Like even that the orgasm is like a place to get to is what can constrain us from experiencing the nuances of discovery.
That's so beautiful. It touches me a lot to hear you say that too. I think I feel, yeah, the pressure of completion. I don't know where I've inherited this idea that I will eventually become the perfect, enlightened, reasonable, well communicative, perfectly sexually orgasmic human with all the emotional intelligence that ever lived. And da, da, da. It's like I will never, and I have lots of money. That's like it's haunting. how strong that grip is. And I think it's one level to be like, oof, wow, the cognitive realization of I don't need to achieve completion. There is no completion. And it's a whole thing to have that felt sense of safety in myself that everything is as it should be right now. And it's okay as it is now.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've completely got there yet. Like I do still think I'm building my sense of safety internally. Um, and I think the beauty is at least that I've accepted that that's a slow journey. It's like I don't need to
Yes.
now. Like it's going to take me
Yeah.
time to feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to take time.
It's going to take
The
time.
beauty of accepting that it's going to take time rather than like this pressure that I have to or should be at a certain point now or ever
Mm-hmm.
in order to be worthy, in order to be enough, in order to be, I don't know if that
Yeah.
resonates, that like it's attached to in order to be something or in order to get to something.
Yeah, I love this because it reminded me of my New Year's resolution, which was to prioritize my nervous system. So I like came into 2024. Are we 24?
Mhm. We're in 24,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm exhausted. I feel burnt out. I know what I need to do. I need to prioritize my nervous system. And what was fascinating was initially I was like, I need to do that so that I can show up to my business, so that I can show up to my relationship. And then I was like, wait, what about just prioritizing my nervous system because that feels good and I'm worthy of having a regulated nervous system. Like that,
Yeah.
like I didn't even think about that until someone reflected it to me. And I was like, oh, wow, yeah, I could just have that in and of itself. It doesn't need to
Yeah.
be get somewhere. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's and I think the piece that's helping me, and it's just such a simple non-sex related tip, is is like gratitude as like
Yeah.
having positive bias on my life, or like as much as possible wiring myself towards noticing joy, noticing like, oh, isn't this really nice that I get to like sit out and look at the water chickens outside of my window.
Yeah.
Pieces like this that allow me to anchor those moments of joy so that I'm remembering those instead of expending a lot of my energy and anxiety and worry about the future.
Mm, beautiful. So it's like just by having that practice of noticing joy, it's rebalancing that part that's like worrying and stressed and wanting to get somewhere and be at the perceived finishing line that doesn't exist.
Yeah, totally. I love the parallels with this and sex. Everything has a parallel with sex.
It is, I know, and it's just it's like the perceived finishing line that doesn't exist. It's like that's what we could label this part of sex where we're like, we need to reach orgasm, and if
Yeah.
you don't come, or if I don't come, then oh my God, I failed, and the whole thing was terrible, and I need to get better at. I need to learn how to be better at performing and doing and or receiving or whatever it is. There's
Yeah.
something wrong with me. I'm broken if I'm not orgasming or you're not orgasming or we're not getting to there and within a certain time frame. And like all of the stories of too much, too little, too long, too short, too this, too that, like it's exactly the same with how we're looking at ourselves in terms of our personal growth and life.
Oh, it's so juicy. It's so juicy to hear you say that so like precisely. And I feel, yeah, there's a certain permission. I think having these conversations help a lot because it shines a light on that pattern. And I think that's where it all starts, like with awareness, it's choice. And so if I can realize that I'm doing that, I'm I'm seeing the metric of orgasm as the metric for good sex. Okay, no, wait, I want to change that. What is my new metric for good sex? What is it? You know, is it going to be how good my body feels? Is it going to
Mm,
be powerful I feel? Is it going to be um, how much connection and safety I feel? You know, and I think
mm.
to just consider that question, like why are you having sex? And the answer to that question will give you the metric of good sex. You know?
Wow. I was just literally about to ask you, like, if for our listeners, if you could ask them one question that would support them towards finding that metric of like what good sex feels like for them, what would it be? So can you repeat that question again, just so that that's like really it can be a question that they take away with them after hearing this episode.
So I would take the time to think about why you have sex. What's your reason? And it doesn't need to be one answer. I think our reason for sex changes moment to moment, partner to partner, day to day, and realizing that can be hundreds of reasons helps expand also the kind of sex we look for. Because if I'm wanting something to like for stress relief, if that's my answer, or
Mm.
for playfulness, then I don't need penetration for playfulness. I can probably just like wrestle my partner naked in the bed and laugh and poke his body, right? It doesn't feel
Mm-hmm.
like I need to have anything. I mean, sex does for me include some arousal, so maybe that's different to like play, but like um I do feel like it's just a powerful, simple but powerful question that people don't ask themselves. Why? Why do I want sex?
Why do I want sex? And do you think it can change moment to moment? So it's like, why do I want sex now? Why do I want sex yesterday? Why did I want it in that moment? Like it's like the answer could be different. It's not the same.
100%. Yes, absolutely. It changes moment to moment, partner to partner. day to day. And I think that's why it's maybe even just considering the last few times you've had sex could be helpful. Or like if you were to have sex right now, why would you want to have sex?
Yes.
To help make it more tangible.
Yeah. And I'd love to maybe just weave in for those who have been listening to this podcast for a while and maybe have a history or an interest in nonviolent communication or compassionate, authentic relating. Some of them might be aware of the practice of like asking a question with like, what needs of mine are being met, or what values of mine am I caring for? So, I might put a list in the episode notes. So there's a list of needs that people can have a look at, so that if you're like, I'm finding it hard to answer this question, then you can look through that list. And even if one of the word that you want is not there, it might kind of bring you closer to like, what value or need or experience is it that I'm yearning for before I move into sex? And that could be, like you said, playfulness. It might be pleasure. It might be closeness. It might be fun. It might be a relaxation. It might be meaning. It might be learning. There's all sorts.
I never thought about cross-referencing that with the list of needs, actually, because I have my own kind of big bucket, list I can also share if you like reasons. But it's a beautiful idea to bring in needs, because I think that it also helps me realize, or helps people to think about whether they actually want sex. Because if they're wanting, as you said, closeness, yes, you can have sex for closeness. But I think, and I see this a lot with men as well, where they feel very, very pressured because it's masculine to want sex, right? To say, yes, surely I should want sex. If a woman sort of initiates or wants it, they can end up going in unconsensually with themselves. So I think just thinking about this question of like, what do I want? Why do I want this? If it's closeness, perhaps I just want to cuddle. A lot of men that
or
have
a massage or a kissing session or telling each other stories or what.
Yeah. And I would add, actually, I know it's not with me now, but the book Sex Talks told me this interesting fact about how you either want sex to get emotional closeness. If some people need sexual intimacy for emotional closeness, and then the other half of the population have to feel emotionally connected before having sex.
Yes.
And so there's an interesting thing there. If you pair with someone who has the opposite tendency, what do you prioritize? It goes into, you kind of unfortunately need to prioritize the person who needs emotional connection first before going into sex. But it's more nuanced than that. But something to just be aware of, going into sexual intimacy with someone that's a bit different.
Yeah, and I think that could take us into a whole new conversation that maybe we'll bookmark here, which is like, the strategies that our nervous systems and our younger selves become accustomed to in order to meet those deeper emotional needs for safety, security, closeness, emotional well-being through sex or not sex, or this first or that first. And I'd love to dive into that as like another topic with you. And then I also have, like, I feel like we began to touch upon it today, but the other topic was like, how can becoming clearer on my sexual preferences or wishes or desires actually deepen the connection in my relationship with myself or with the other person. And so we started to do that, but like, I feel like we'll close it here so that people, because there's already to chew on from and take in from what we already explored. But if you're up for it, Haneen, I'd love to have another chat with you on those topics and more.
I'd love that. We could go on for ages. I love talking to you. It's so powerful and just so much to munch on. And it's so, sometimes I find it hard to like distill sex and relationships, and I think there's something about talking about it with someone that helps bring it alive and to see how it ripples across so many areas of life. Because I do think these things are not discrete, they're not closed areas of our lives, they're all connected. So I'm really looking forward to part 2 maybe 3 and so on.
Me too, me too. And if anyone listens to this one and you notice that you have curiosity questions that you'd like to have answered in a chat with me and Haneen, then just send it to us, because we'd love to hear. It's always nice to hear what's bubbling in the listeners. What would you love to hear us talking about? What would support you in your journey with sex and dating and relationships? So yeah, do send a message, and we'll put in the chat all of the links that we spoke about and the book that you mentioned. And please do send me, Haneen, the list of reasons, because I think it'd be great to have both of them there for people to just have a little look at. Why not? I want to have a look at that list.
I'd love to share. You can send that across. Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you so much, Haneen. What a pleasure.